Hi, I'm a fan. I've been in the game for 16 years plus. I feel like I've been constantly troubleshooting for 16 years. I think as this digital curve has evolved, we get lots of lumps and bumps along the way, but it's adrenaline pumping stuff. It's exciting. I feel like we're at a point where the media model is completely flipped on its head. Another one of those adrenaline busting periods, which and I actually see it as a really good opportunity. I think there's the real chance for agencies, publishers, clients to really stand out from all of this. But we're in the trenches at the moment, but it's good to have these discussions. So I work at Media Hub. I look after the digital and data product, and the last kind of 4 months have been very busy working with our clients, getting them ready for IDFA and cookie deprecation.
Okay, great. So let's go to Leo next from Media Sense. A quick introduction, Leo, how you're seeing this?
Yeah, of course. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Okay, so well, I've been working in advertising for about 15 years on the agency side and then on the client side for the last 4 years, and moved to Media Sense, to the media advisory world 4 months ago. So I have a completely different experience from the rest of the panel, I guess, which is interesting because I can see the perspective from the agency, from the client side, and from the advisory side. And what we do see is that advertisers look at it in a different way. Some are more concerned, some are more aware, others are not so worried. And I think one of the reasons was pointed out already. If they are not direct to consumers, if they don't have a business where there is a direct relationship, there is not so much worry from their side, from what we have seen so far. But I think I do see this as an opportunity for advertisers to establish a different and a new and a renewal on the relationship with consumers, going direct with them.
Okay, great. So I think both you and I found, there's a positive opportunity that, to do things better, I think, isn't there, from there. So let's move to Sam as the last of our panelists from Phosphor. Sam, you have a quick introduction and then tell us how you're seeing this space right now, and then we'll dig in.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam. I'm the Chief Executive of Phosphor. I've been building this business for the last few years. I'll talk about it in a second. Started sort of client side and e-commerce. I've seen both sides of it. At Phosphor, we built an attribution modeling product designed for direct-to-consumer brands to optimize cross-channel cost of customer acquisition. And we sort of built the whole thing for a privacy-first world. So sort of no third-party cookies, no sort of third-party sort of user-level data, just clients' first-party data and aggregated ad platform data. So from a product perspective, we've been unscathed in the last few months. But in terms of sort of what we're seeing more broadly, a lot more conversations with brands who felt like they're flying particularly blind in the last couple of months, particularly. I think for a lot of e-commerce brands, particularly, sort of explosive growth in e-com over the last 12 months has probably masked or at least deprioritized some of the kind of measurement challenges they've had. And obviously for other industries, it's put them in a little bit more of an existential crisis. And I think what we're probably seeing now is a perfect storm of, iOS landing at a time when that sort of huge increase in demands translated to an increase in ad platform costs. I saw something like 75% up year on year for Facebook. So all of a sudden you've got this kind of like the double hit of your targeting and measurement taking a hit at the same time that the costs are rising. So it's certainly feeling like a pinch point for a bunch of businesses that we're talking to.
Right. Okay. So before we dig in, let's couple of bit of housekeeping things. Can you all go on mute until we've got maybe questions later? We're going to do questions on the chat, but if you mute, we avoid the background and the sort of the helicopters or whatever from there, which would be great. You can follow and join the debate on Twitter. We're using the hashtag, Blis will be using it, #GetItInPersonal. So very welcome to join the debate from there. Well, sticking with the point we're making with Sam, what issues, we talked about those our last session. I think what's really pertinent now is, a lot of the things we've relied on for measurement just disappear. So 28-day attribution has disappeared from Facebook, and 7 days pushing 1-day attribution. Let's talk about that. Was 28-day view views any very sensible? And when Aaron and I were chatting about this before, in prep, we talking about, is the click back, is the click, which is much derided and much disputed, but works in e-commerce, is the click back as our main sort of metric. So Sam, let's continue with you from there. You've got a business which is, focused on this area. How are you coping with that sort of suddenly going from a month attribution down to much shorter ones? And what clients thinking about that?
Yeah, that was gosh, great question, a lot to unpack. So there's I suppose there's two parts to this. There's like, number one is the sort of the actual impact on sort of, let's focus on Facebook, that Facebook's sort of ability to target, and then also there's the impact, or I suppose the changing mindset of their clients in the way that they advertise, the way that they think about their budget allocation, based on the limited measurement. So like there's a real actual impact, Facebook's ability to track people from Facebook to advertiser that translates to retargeting and prospecting challenges, and that's definitely taken a hit. And then, as I said, there's, because you can see less, you start sort of gearing back towards, you said, like the return of the click, because it's more difficult to measure views. You sort of gravitate to what you know. And I think like the first things first is, I guess Aaron probably touched on it with like the uptick and the better than expected. I think like from what we're seeing, it's a hit rather than an existential crisis for Facebook here, right? I mean, like certainly in e-commerce, brands depend on them like by far and away as their most significant acquisition digital channel, and clear that the difference, they'll see if they look at a click-based attribution model in Google Analytics compared to what they see in Facebook. Clearly it's not all about the clicks, because I think that the major bit of feedback that we would hear is that GA isn't fit really, sort of, a click-based model isn't really fit for purpose for measuring your sort of your social and impression-led activity. So I think it's. I think what we're probably finding is that this, rather than sort of people totally changing their mindset and totally changing the way that they think about Facebook, it's stimulating a lot of internal conversations about greater channel diversity. So a lot of brands have been all in on Facebook, and there's probably a bit of a wake-up call for marketers that have that. They're realizing that over dependency introduces more risk. I think probably on the point around because clicks, because Facebook's attribution window is becoming more limited, like brands changing the way that they advertise. I think that's probably it feels like a real shame. We're probably finding that businesses are shifting their budget towards conversion-based activity, which is 1-day view, like click. Traditionally that sort of tighter attribution window at the expense of some of the upper funnel activity. You said for e-commerce that they tend to be a bit more sort of click-based focus anyway. I think they typically are more focused on efficiency, so like more of the budget in conversion versus brand and awareness activity. I think that probably the biggest impact that we've seen with the limiting of the windows is we had probably in the last 6 months started to see businesses that have done very, very well over the last 12 starting to distribute their budgets a little bit more proportionately across conversion-based and brand and awareness activity. And the thing I fear is that as the windows get tighter, they start getting a bit led by what they can measure versus what the right thing to do is in terms of a healthy mix.
So that's quite interesting. So you've got a profile of business that's very focused on Facebook. Fan, looking across your agency portfolio, one of the theories is that the onset of privacy and the consequences will drive some people to spend more money with walled gardens. Sam's sort of seeing a little bit the other way. How are you seeing that right now? Are you thinking about more for the walled gardens or less? And does the attribution question and the need to compare that across different platforms drive that?
So we don't necessarily, I think the solution is not necessarily walled gardens. The solution that we're consistently talking to our clients about, the solution to cookie deprecation, It's one thing, and it's first-party data. So our message is, if you can get consented first-party data, or even site traffic data, and start building seeds and profiles, and enrich and scale them using additional sources, and build those segments, you can syndicate those in walled gardens, but you can also syndicate them potentially outside the walled gardens. And I think the solution really is about building those first-party data profiles, some of which will go in, some of which will go out. And I think the point earlier around, clicks are back. I think clicks will become increasingly more important as cookies deprecate. Clicks, traffic, landing page visits will create the gold rush of first-party data, and so there's this big transition of clients putting more value towards actually driving qualified quality users, getting them registered, getting them consented to build that pool of first-party data. And I genuinely think that's the only solution to cookie deprecation. All the other solutions out there, sandbox solutions and aggregated solutions, we think is a distraction. So yeah, we're looking at it in that way. The walled gardens are ways for us to activate. They do come with benefits. I think Google certainly, if we think about, as an example, if you're running app marketing and you're investing with Google, then you should absolutely be investing with Firebase, which is their app measurement tool. You should also be measuring using Kachava. You should probably use them together. So if you are doing a lot of app marketing and you are investing in Google, then suddenly you become wedded to their tools, and so you should, because it provides better attribution within that ecosystem. So we can never get away from that, right? We can never get away from that. But I think it's probably the question more is, how can we activate valuable audience segments rather than should we use walled gardens versus not walled gardens? Okay, well, we're going to come on to the other purported solutions for this later on. Aaron, we talked about the click the other day, and you were talking about, in your background, you've seen that it's a very good quality indicator. Picking up on the point that Irfan's making about finding other sources of data as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about your thinking on there?
Yeah, I mean, really, what he said really resonates with me. I think if the result of this is that we just retrench to Facebook and Google, that really feels unfortunate, right? Because I'm a bit on the cynical side. I think a lot of the maneuvers that they've done really are self-serving rather than altruistic. And if they benefit from this, that doesn't seem like a great outcome. And I think, there's certainly been some evidence that some of those places, they sort of put their hands on the measurement rudder, as it were, and steer it in the direction they want. So how much are they trusted? I think if we can find a way of using or creating first-party data, whether that's client first-party data or ad tech provider first-party data, if you can find a way of getting a view of customers that is valuable to you, and you can find a way of activating that with or without a cookie or made or other identifier, I think that's the most robust path forward. It's certainly the path that we've invested in. We sort of similar to that, we might be able to take, say, loyalty card holders from McDonald's, or we can take people who've actually been seen in a McDonald's, and we can profile them, we can analyze them, we can try to sort of build it, let's call it we call it dynamic audiences, but effectively it's a cohorting type technology. You figure out the parameters that define that audience and allows you to reach them without having to just activate that in one of the walled gardens. I think, again, if you have that loyalty card database or the people who have registered to your site, it's a wonderful signal, it's a wonderful place, but it's a wonderful place to start with. It's sort of that seed or so forth. If you limit the activation scale to just those people that decide to come to your e-commerce site and register for a newsletter, and you're not likely to deliver an impactful business outcome if you solely rely upon that. So it's going from creating that really rich first-party data set and then figuring out how do you reliably extend that in some sort of way that's a little bit more intelligent and a little bit better performing than just blind context advertising, and at a better scale than what you would get only relying upon something like a universal ID or just that seed data set that you have. I think clicks is a good way of driving optimization of when you activate that, how do you define whether something works or not? Again, I think back to that attribution side, there's sort of two sides to attribution. There's the, how do you take credit for the things that you think you've influenced? And then ultimately, how do your ad ops teams actually optimize a campaign? And these don't always have purposes that align with each other. I think from an optimization perspective, like what media mix is working or formats or messaging is working, the click tends to be a very powerful signal. It's one of the best leading indicators that you have of performance, especially if you're lacking some other things. I certainly never trusted a 28-day view through window. So,
yeah, I'm not a big fan. So Leah, let's just talk about that. But also the other side of what we're hoping for is, these changes we go through will work out to be the benefit of the users. So they'll see less annoying ads for something you're going to buy or you've bought anyway from there. But one of the things that comes part and parcel of attribution was our ability to manage frequency. We could make sure that someone didn't see more of our ads than we really thought was appropriate from there. And we managed to work that quite well. How are you thinking about that now going forward? When you talk to the clients you advise, how do you avoid you're flooding the market with too many ads and annoying people? How do you manage that when the tools to do that are now changing if they haven't quite disappeared?
That is one of the setbacks, because I think the intention of all these at the beginning was to provide a better experience to the user, right? And if advertisers and if the industry doesn't operate as expected, we might end up with providing a worse experience, even worse experience to the user. And I think that's something that needs to be worked on. Advertisers will need to find other signals to leverage to provide a better user experience, a better UI, and use data, because the fact is they will have less visibility to the user journey. So they will need to correlate data from different platforms. They will need to liaise with their own first-party data, upload, find correlations to effectively target and provide a good user experience. And that's where I believe the creativity will become even more important. So the creative, I think, will play a much bigger role than what has been playing so far. And I think because we won't be able to compare data year on year, which is one of the main challenges I do see. So whenever an agency or even the companies that operate media in-house, they will now operate on Facebook or even in Google, display, search, whatsoever. The performance using the same campaigns within the same time periods, year on year, whatsoever, will have complete different outcome, even if it is the same time period, the same seasonality, because the results, the whole experience, the cookie, the fact the cookie is not there, are not there anymore, the fact that the experience on Apple devices and Google will be completely different, will impact the measurement. So therefore, the need to find different signals and the need to see the whole campaign performance as an holistic perspective, rather than channel or platform, because I think we are moving from channels, from search, social, programmatic, and so on, to platform, Facebook, TikTok, the walled gardens of this world.
Okay. That gives us a good platform to build on there, Leo. So thank you for that. Just before I'm going to go back to Sam, but before we do that, do we just remind everyone that we're open for questions, or if you've got a vehement disagreement with something said, use the chat and we'll try and get through those in the last sort of 10 or 15 minutes of our session. But we've got a super smart panel, here to answer questions if you've got any from there. But let me jump back to you, Sam. Leo's making the point about measurement. And one of the things that's interesting is that over the years, the world of digital has forged a different path of measurement than the world of traditional. So if you sit in WPP agencies, econometric modeling, be much more about multi-touch, whereas digital agencies will be much more about clicked, views, etc. from there. You've got a dog in this fight, so but can you just give us a view of how you think that people will be thinking about measurement going forward?
Yes, yeah, for sure. Not trying to talk too much about us. Yes, so I'll start by saying, we've been building the business since 2017, and pretty early on took the decision that we weren't going to rely on any user level data from our platforms. I try and claim that that's because we were some sort of prophets, but in reality, we learned the hard way, like probably everyone else did, and that started with seeing Facebook pause their sort of MTA partner program following Cambridge Analytica, where they were going to start sharing user level impression data with sort of independent providers. And then of course, post GDPR, Google removing the ability to see display impression data at the user level. So like there's been a number of kind of like pretty big significant knocks to the sort of what we call the sort of traditional MTA approach. And what these things sort of taught us, and I think not just us, taught everyone, is that there's just sort of no defensibility in relying on sort of privileged access to data from sort of Google, Facebook, and beyond. And we at Phosphor we stopped any sort of product development that along those lines and invested wholly in attribution using only first-party client data sets and aggregates, so non-user level data from our platforms. And in a nutshell, like you mentioned MTA and econometrics, like the answer is like a little bit of both. Is what we're seeing. Not just us, but more broadly. In wherever a client has a customer's permission to sort of track them through a first-party cookie, that sort of anonymous multi-touch click-based journey. As Aaron mentioned, still a very, very strong signal, right? The click and where they came from it would be mad to not consider that as a valuable source for attribution. But then on the flip side, that's just become more and more limited. So the amount that you can actually track and join at the user level just is being eroded, not just by iOS, not just by Cambridge Analytica and what Facebook did after that, GDPR, Safari and cookie windows just getting sort of shorter and shorter. So not a complete source of data, but still valuable, and the sort of what everyone would recognize as the traditional MTA approach of join the dots wherever you can and spread credit fairly is still valid. But then I think what's kind of interesting is, there's some stuff. It's just very clear that we're never getting the sort of the user level data from Facebook on impressions and Google on display data. So there has to be another way. And our sort of approach has been to apply some of the principles of econometrics to how we think about impressions. Essentially, can we find the correlation between aggregate ad metrics, impressions in platforms, and incremental traffic, incremental conversions, and incremental sales on a client's website? And where we do, very, very simple terms, if everything else remains the same and there's one extra Facebook impression, one extra visit, one extra sale, that's an easy attribution to solve, problem to solve. In reality, much more complex. But when you find that correlation, you're able to reattribute away from the click back towards the channel and the impression that really drove it. So it's a blend of approaches. And I think the final thing I'd say on it is just that we find these sort of privacy changes just completely liberating. Actually, people who've been doing this for a while, it sounded like the panel has long a lot of experience in the space. They'll remember that marketers have just spent so much time, effort, money trying to join the dots up across everything to be able to do anything, right? Obsessing about whether an ad has appeared in somebody's feed rather than what that actually meant. And I think from a Phosphor perspective, from our product perspective, we found it incredibly liberating to only really care if I can see the correlation between the ads and an outcome. And in that respect, I think sort of embrace the best of econometrics whilst also not totally shutting the doors on first party click based, the MTA approach.
Yeah. Okay, so Leo, so in your business, you're advising people across a whole range of how they're spending their money from there. Is there a side benefit of the move towards these different models? You can start to look at television versus digital and things like that, where it's always been very sort of separate in the past.
It's a challenging one. I think in regards to measurement, I think we need to learn from the past, and advertisers need to look into their own data. And if they had multi-touch attribution in the past, even better. If they had media mix modeling or econometrics or A/B testing, geographic whatsoever, that is a great help. But I think it was already mentioned, establishing a first-party data strategy is critical. Whether you are direct to consumer or not is very important for activation purpose. And I think it was also mentioned, the value exchange that you provide to the users, whether it is on your website to collect the cookies or to just collect consent. And get the approval to use the data, or on mobile with ATT and IAAD. It doesn't really matter. It's about getting the consent to use and collect that data. But I think the most important thing for advertisers is to not really get tied to tech, to the platform itself, but more to understand the process and implement the systems to better operate whenever there is a challenge, when a challenge comes up, a challenge like this. And you cannot be tied with the technology if then, for certain reason, you need to move to another one. And that's where the buyers come from.
Okay. Well, let's just move that on a little bit from there. I know if I mentioned this before. So I think we're all agreed that, you know, we see there's some positives going to come out of all these changes from there. There's no point trying to just replicate the past. But let's talk about universal IDs for a minute, because there's still sort of a lot of activity in this section. And we're having to debate, there's a stock market saying the dead cat bounce, that you can drop a cat and if it's dead, it will bounce and appear, you know, some life. I try to work out if universal IDs or something like that, because it still gets talked about. There's something I don't quite understand from yesterday at the Apple event. You'll be able to use burner emails. So the very idea that an email is your bit of sanctity and connection with someone seems to be going from there. But Irfan, do you want to talk about your views on universal IDs? Are you deciding just to completely ignore them, or?
So, I mean, our message to clients is spend all of your resource and all of your time and all of your energy just thinking about and acting on how you can build your customer data, because that's the only thing that really is the only solution for you, like future-proofing your business around targeting, around attribution, around all of your investment. It's easy for clients to look at universal ID and look at privacy sandbox solutions and say we're covered because these things are coming and they're being tested, etc. But it's the wrong way to look at it. I mean, our view to clients is, you know, that one solution is first-party data, and everything else over here that's happening is a distraction. But you should keep an eye on it, because as these things get tested and as they're successfully rolled out, then we should look at it. But don't rely on those things. Rely on building your golden nuggets of your own data.
Okay. And Aaron, that's the approach you've taken with Blis, isn't it, really? Rather than wait for some sort of white, you know, the cavalry to come charging over the horizon with some tech solution on IDs or sandbox, you've created your own way of doing things.
Yeah, I guess like many of you, when we looked at the possible solutions, and there's a range of options, right? We can just, you know, give up it and go back to contextual targeting and show trainers ads on the Guardian football page, because why not, right? But I don't think there's any expectation that is particularly performant. And then the other end of that spectrum are the universal IDs. And let's pick the unified ID as an example. I probably one of the most skeptical people in the industry about that. I mean, I guess I look at the data that we see. We get the unified IDs across our bid stream at such a small percentage of volume that it's effectively inconsequential. I look at the type of conversations websites or brands are going to have with customers to convince them to log in, and it's a pretty high bar to cross. And then you talk about the thing you mentioned with the Apple thing, which is, you know, the single sign-on with the Apple, where you can obfuscate the email, or people using different emails across different sites. I mean, you're going to get a small pool of people that are somewhat identifiable, but nothing like what we get with third-party cookies. It's going to be very fragmented. Even reputable publishers like The Guardian or whatnot are not going to be able to convince all of their audience to log in. And if they do log into The Guardian, are they going to log in when they go buy something at B&Q? Are they going to log in when they go to the Telegraph and get their, you know, 1 or 3 free articles a month or so for it? I think, you know, what Irfan was saying, you should support it. It's a bit of a distraction. It'd be silly not to support it. But if that's where you're putting all of your eggs, I think you're going to be in for a very rude awakening. And Google's certainly underscoring that. You know, they're saying they don't believe this is long-term viable. This isn't the direction that the regulators want to go, that consumers are saying they want to go. Apple is saying it's not going to be supported in the mobile app ecosystem at the very least. And they're doing more things to make it difficult even in the mobile web ecosystem. I certainly would not be building companies around unified ID or investing in that as the solution. And again, I think there's taking, again, the aggregated approach, the cohorting approach, which you're looking at quasi-personal or impersonal signals that reflect your audience. You know, multiple facets of context, or figuring out what are the parameters based on that seed audience that Irfan mentioned, how do you identify the audience without actually identifying the people in that audience? And there's ways of doing that. There's cohorting, or I don't want to use the word fingerprinting because that implies that you're trying to identify an individual person, but it's sort of called like meta fingerprinting, or finding out the characteristics that define an audience as opposed to the individuals in that audience. And I think that's the strategy that most companies are going to have to settle on once they go through the growing pains and realize these other solutions aren't really fit for purpose.
Okay.
Quite pleased, but I was going to say, so I'm just quite pleased that actually we none of us were set up with the script because I thought this might be the question where we sort of did have some slight divergence in opinion on it. So it's nice to hear that we're all relatively closely aligned. Kind of feels a bit like, I mean, a bit to be a bit facetious, feels a bit like a rebrand, doesn't it? Of like it's third-party cookies by a different name in a slightly different way. And I think, as you said, Aaron, it's just like it's a workaround versus really embracing the spirit of the legislation and the changes. And like, if you're using a workaround, it's going to get shut down in the way that we've seen everything else get shut down.
I mean, it's a workaround that's tied to your bloody personal email. The opt-out mechanisms are intransparent as best. I mean, in no way, shape, or form can you look at this and think, yeah, that's a good substitute. I know the ICO is going to love this one.
Yeah, it's also, yeah. It's not exactly like a few years ago. It's not exactly like everything was like perfectly joined up anyway. So like, it's difficult to imagine that in a world where you've got the privacy regulation legislation and spirit catching up with you, that you're going to have a better thing than the thing which, let's face it, wasn't that perfect.
I just see the complexity because there are so many identity solutions nowadays, right? And I think Amazon has just announced their own one. We have Verizon and the ones that have already been mentioned. And for an advertiser, you can imagine the complexity. Which one shall we test? And how can we test so many? Because they need to set up vendors, and which is not easy for any big advertiser, and then test the solution, and then which one can effectively deliver the scale that the advertisers need. And then, to be fair, there was no independent monitoring solution in the past for cookie-based audience. So when you were looking for third-party data, so there won't be now. I think for effective scale, you still need to leverage the lookalikes and the similar profiles across multiple publishers. I do see these as the only way.
I think scale to me feels like the Achilles heel of universal ID, because there's so many people trying to do it. Everyone's got their, one they're supporting. And Trade Desk to me felt like, they're big enough to make a success of something because they've got so much scale. And they've handed over to IAB, almost an open source project. So it feels like there's a little bit of sort of protecting what they're doing from there. But Sam makes a good point about the regulators. The ICO is still saying that they're going to, come out with some action against the RTB reality we have with cookies. So we're not out of the woods there. The idea that we can find some workaround which will sort of perpetuate something which is going to get regulated feels like a fairly pointless exercise. But let's just push that over. The scale thing is what really supports the Google idea that they're driving sandbox, and Google's scale in every aspect of the ad tech makes it viable. Do we think they've got a chance as well? Do you see the privacy sandbox from Google really getting traction?
I mean, the thing with Google is that their sandbox solutions, Fledge and Flock in Europe, aren't GDP compliant. That's why they've not been able to test them. So, and in the US, they've just started testing, but they're behind. So, I mean, they're not going to deprecate cookies until they've found a solution, until one of these solutions actually is tested and works. So we might actually find that cookies get deprecated a year later, or there could be a delay in that. So in Europe, I think it's going to be tricky for them to find a GDPR compliant way of doing it. They've also obviously got the anti-competitive laws to work against, and I think they'll get there. But it's going to be very much a suboptimal solution, a bit of a distraction. Clients, I keep saying this, but clients can basically create their own audience seeds and syndicate them into Google today, tomorrow, in 3 years, and that's the solution. That's how you target your audience, and then obviously the reporting obviously comes out of those solutions. So yeah, we're kind of just waiting and see on those privacy sandbox solutions with extreme caution, and I would very much expect more lumps and bumps for them in terms of privacy and anti-competitive laws for them to kind of tackle along the way.
I think there's another factor last night. The amount of work that Apple's doing on the browser is quite interesting. So Google is relying on the browser as the platform or the surface where this is going to take part. Facebook have come out and said they don't want to do the browser because they recognize their two big rivals, Google and Apple, control most browsers. And if Apple's sort of playing around with the browser, you sort of think along the way with their privacy hats on, they're going to find some ways of making sure that the new version of the browser does what they want it to do rather than what Google wants it to do.
Yeah, the thing on that, just to say, Simon, I do believe, and I've seen from experience, that many advertisers, and some of them quite big ones, don't want to work with Google. So that opens a door for many other DSPs and technology, and the Google flock might not be for everyone. So if there is an independent solution, that's what they will be looking for.
Okay. So Don, we've got a comment in chat from Don Devlin, I think, at Phosphor. Doesn't success scenario for universal IDs, i.e. huge scale of audience, just automatically attract regulators? And the scale of consented consumers increases, the likelihood consented for understood the concept rather than clicking. So it seems high risk. I think that someone made a point earlier, if the Guardian's persuaded me to register for the Guardian, why would the Guardian share that with anybody else? You know, it's more valuable if they've got the right to talk to, you know, me than sharing it with B&Q or McDonald's or anybody else from there. So this idea that, you know, I think Irfan's talking for all of us, this idea, you know, we focus on our clients' first-party data. Once you have that as a client or a publisher, a media owner, you're going to preserve that because you don't want it to disappear. You don't abuse that to whatever from there. So it becomes really important. The idea of sharing that's going to be quite interesting is how do people persuade people to find ways of, you know, connecting that, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole world of data ownership completely spun on its head. I think, my view is in 3 years or plus, it'll be very common for clients to data share between them. Data will be scarce, and the ones that obviously have consented data will be way ahead. But you know, for those that don't, they'll actually see value in jumping into a safe haven data environment, or even maybe a clean room environment, and two brands that complement each other might jump in and share data between each other. They might do it with Google, and you might get 2 or 3 brands. So I think the future of it is about data brokerage, partnerships, and I think that's where publishers. I mean, it's really hard for publishers because if you have a low amount of registered users, then your ad revenue is going to, you know, fall off a cliff, which it has done and it will do, and for them it's about, you know, building that registered consent up, and so I can see why the likes of Guardian, etc., are doing it, because if it means they drive incremental yield, then that's clearly the most important thing for them. So I think my view is we're going to see a trend of even competitors, complementary brands, publishers coming together and grouping up to share audience data to build stronger intel between them.
It's interesting. One of the things that me being so old, I remember that there's a thing called Project Jigsaw in the 90s, I think, where Cadbury's, Unilever, about 4 or 5 big FMCG companies got together to share their DM databases. So a little magazine would turn up to all these people who had signed up with one of these people, but they get coupons and offers from all those people. So I think there's some interesting things where you can find a value add and work together. And we're very interested in this idea of merchant media, where a Tesco or an Amazon or a Walmart, you know, start to use their database to actually building media solutions for advertisers as well. We've got one question from Alistair Hill of On Device Research. Do first-party research panels have a role in e-commerce attribution in the future? Aaron, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is certainly yes. And I guess the question is, are they going to be able to do it at a sufficient scale? You know, on the attribution side, you know, Blis has historically been a location-rooted business. You know, we would find people that go to Tesco, and we'd be able to show them ads, be able to measure how effectively we are at driving people back to Tesco. And we've expanded beyond that into the other digital realms and so forth. But ultimately, you need a sort of a scale of response that you can attribute to your activities to be able to measure it. So one of the things that we've experimented with is maybe showing survey ads to people. Did you actually go to Tesco? Even if we can't measure all of them because of the data scarcity, if you send enough ads out there and you survey your audience and you ask them, what do you think of Coca-Cola today versus yesterday? Have you been to Tesco in the past 7 days? All these sort of things, you sort of get onto the pulse of that audience. You sort of get that sense of it. And I think, you know, again, whether we lean on that market research or the first party research companies, or with it sort of reinvent some of those principles ourselves in this post-identity world, I think that sort of mass sampling approach, it has value. And maybe Sam, I mean, that's some of what you guys might be doing over at FOSFA.
Was the question first party survey data and its value for attribution? Yeah. I mean, like there's even a simpler version of that, which is asking the customer at the point of checkout, right? The survey then at the point of purchase. And that's actually like, that's a pretty, I mean, conceptually asking a customer where they heard about you is super valuable. Like we talk with businesses that will have built themselves a really decent amount of extra runway by thinking about this and using those kind of data sources on top of what they get from the clicks that they can see, what the ad platforms tell them. If they're just simply asking the customer where they heard about them, particularly for more difficult to measure stuff, right? So like the stuff which isn't click-based, so like, yes, your impression-led activity, your above the line stuff, like, we've seen some businesses that, yes, they'll reset, survey panels, but also like, in some cases, and it needs to be deployed carefully, mandatory checkout survey fields when like, highly sort of data-driven and randomized. So they're not just getting that sort of everyone clicks the first box. It's a smart data set. And we've been sort of positively surprised by, how much further along businesses can get in their sort of growth journey using data sources like that on top of what they see in, the usual places. So like I'm 100% up for that. And actually, if anything, on the sort of as these changes happen, the winners will be the ones, they take this as a forcing mechanism to go, well, what else can I get? What else can I use? Like, what else can I find out about my customer? So like, like a big fan.
Okay, so we're really short time. Irfan's going to drop off with another call. So let's just take 5 more minutes just to, if each of the panelists can just sort of, a bit of advice for the audience. There's a lot going on. There's a lot changing. What advice would you give, the people who come along to think about this day? What should they be thinking about over the next 2 or 3 months in terms of preparing and getting ready for all this? Should we start with you, Leo?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it goes to the main point I tried to make before. If they have any attribution tool or data that they can look at for the last 3, 4, 5 years, I think they should look into the insights, the learnings, try to see where the seasonality is, how one touch point impacts the other, how one channel impacts the other, and so on. I think this is critical because the fact is, from my experience, it doesn't change that much unless there is a TV spot or anything outstanding. There is no much impact on your day-to-day weighting across channels. The other aspect we already said is look into the first-party data strategy, how they collect the data, what value exchange they provide to users to really enhance the part where they really consent to share the data, right? And last bit, but also important, although I believe the technology is, or the tech solution is not that important, the most important part is to really look into the process, the systems, how you operate, how you segment the data, how you segment the audience, and then what technologies you want to test, in what markets, even in one market, how you use it, what KPIs you establish, and how you scale those audiences.
Great. Sam?
So tips. I think like probably first thing, like we talked about first party data has been like obviously a consistent theme. I think like translating that, make sure you know your customer better than anyone else does. And I think like actually that's one of the areas where lots of businesses are like just abdicated responsibility to Google and to Facebook to know their customers better than them. Like I think at the core it's about like, you through your first party data, you should know your customer better than anyone. And then, once you do, don't let your marketing strategy be determined by the data that's easiest to get hold of or to measure. And that like in the context of my earlier point about iOS and this sort of a reaction to sort of click-based and conversion based activity versus brand and awareness, like know your customer, stick to your guns and don't let yourself be directed by just what's the data that's available. Don't be a slave to your data. And then the final thing probably is just give yourself options. So like channel and sort of strategy diversity mitigates your risk when goalposts do move. So the businesses that have been all in on Facebook are the ones who probably felt it the most over the last few months, the last few weeks particularly. So having a good spread means you're a little bit more agile when you do need to make some tweaks.
Okay, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, it feels like you might be my brother from another mother, whether it's the green shirt or the beard, but I think we're pretty much seeing things very similarly. I don't want to disagree with Irfan too much since he's already had a chance to drop out. I do believe in the power of first-party data. I don't think you can rely upon it, whether that first party is tied to cookies or to maids or unified IDs or whatever. I think it's the powerful way that you understand your true customer. And again, you get to the heart of what is that customer, not just here's a bag of device IDs. And hopefully many businesses will be in the position of not just wanting to show ads to their existing customers, but maybe find new customers. And if your entire solution is reliant upon some sort of device identity or registration, I think you'll find chinks in the armor there. So you need to get to the heart of who are your customers, how do you identify them, and how do you reach them at scale in a way that performs without personal data. And then ultimately, the devil in the details, how do you actually measure the effectiveness of that? And we're not going to be able to do multi-touch attribution in any sort of great way. Not that we even were doing it in a good way before. We were sort of convincingly lying to each other with numbers in a lot of cases. And I think what we're going to have to look at is how do you actually find what is truly incremental? And that goes back to old-fashioned sort of holdout groups and incrementality analysis and trying to figure out how do you really measure the effectiveness of your campaign when effectively you can't even measure your reach anymore. The concept of being able to robustly say, I have shown an ad to 1 million consumers, we're not going to be in that place. To say that I've shown exactly 3.5 or 3 ads to 1 million consumers because of very tight frequency caps, that era is going away. So how do we know that we have successfully reached the right audience, that we've driven them to behave, and that we have confidence in the results? And I think that's a lot of things which we need to agree on across the industry. And again, not just go back to, I think I see what you're saying, Sam, don't just do what you can measure, do what's right.
Right. So to me, it feels like there's two bits of learning from there, really. One is, it's going to be hard. There's no easy solution here. You can't get something off the shelf. You've got to put the hard yards and work out what works for you, what's worked for you in the past, what you think will work for you now, and test and learn from there. And the second thing is that, everyone's going to be different. That what works for one company won't work for somebody else from there. So it'd be interesting that sort of like, I'm a great believer that if you get this stuff right, you can get competitive advantage. If you're better at getting at Google and Facebook and Amazon in years gone by than you do your competitive advantage, because most people aren't that good at getting out of Google, Facebook and Amazon. In the new world, it can be equally valid. If you're good at this stuff, you can prosper. If you sit around waiting for something to turn up, which is a bit like the past, you are going to have hard times again from there. So fortune favors the brave. So look, we're out of time. We're going to have another session in 3 weeks' time on the 29th. We're going to be more future focused and think about what's really happening next. We'll also have a better take on, we're 2 months into the new privacy regime then, so we'll have a better take again on how things are developing. We'll have another fantastic panel. But in the meantime, what we'll do is tomorrow we'll just send out a copy of the video. So if you've missed something, you can catch up on that. We'll send out a link to the new session that we're doing in 3 weeks' time. And we look forward to talking with you again. And if there's any questions, reply to that email and we can, talk to Sam or Irfan or Leo or Aaron, can come back and talk in more detail from there. There's a lot going on. The more we're talking about this, I think the better. And thank you for all your time today.